If anyone asks, I was never here. The woman's voice came from beyond a door Vincent Han had been told was permanently locked. He stopped in the old service corridor, one hand still holding the leather travel bag he had carried in from the car. It was nearly midnight, 13 days after he had left his estate outside New York for business overseas, and nothing about his return had been scheduled. The household staff expected him the following afternoon. Richard Cole, his estate manager, believed he was still 30,000 feet above the Pacific. Vincent preferred it that way. At 39, the Korean-American man had built his life around knowing what happened before other people knew he was watching. Yet tonight, inside his own home, something was wrong. One ceiling light burned above a corridor that should have been dark. A cleaning cart stood abandoned beside the wall. Then came another sound from behind the door. Hello. Vincent set down his bag. Silence. My name is Vincent Han. This is my house. A long pause followed. I know who you are. The answer was quiet, exhausted, but clear. Vincent reached the door and found it secured. His expression changed. Who was in there? Naomi Brooks. The name meant nothing to him, and that realization would trouble him later. Do you work here? Housekeeping. Vincent immediately called the overnight security supervisor and ordered the door opened. He did not demand explanations. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood there until access was restored. When the door finally opened, Vincent saw a black woman in a wrinkled gray housekeeping uniform sitting near the far wall. She looked exhausted and wary, but her eyes were focused directly on him. Vincent remained at the threshold. He did not approach without permission. Miss Brooks, Naomi nodded. Are you injured? I need water. Vincent turned toward the security supervisor. Bring water. Call for medical assistance. Now. The man hurried away. Vincent looked back at Naomi. May I come closer? She studied him for several seconds before nodding once. Vincent stepped inside and stopped several feet away. Up close, he could see how carefully she was, watching every movement around her. How long have you been in here? He asked. Naomi swallowed. Her answer came without drama, which somehow made it heavier. I have been chained here 12 days. Vincent went completely still. The enormous estate beyond that room seemed to disappear from his awareness. 12 days. 12 mornings when payroll had been processed. 12 evenings when dinner had been served. 12 nights when security reports had reached his phone telling him everything at home was normal. Who did this? Vincent asked. Naomi shook her head. That is not the first question you should be asking. He waited. She looked toward the open doorway, then toward the corridor beyond it. First, make sure he cannot come back. Vincent understood. He stepped into the hall and quietly instructed security that nobody was to enter the service wing without authorization and that Naomi's safety came before every household concern. When he returned, water had arrived. Naomi held the glass with both hands. Vincent crouched several feet away so she would not have to look upward at him. All right, he said. Then I will ask the right question. Naomi met his eyes. Who knew you were here? For the first time, fear gave way to something sharper in her expression. More people than will admit it. And in that moment, Vincent realized the problem inside his house was far larger than one locked door. 12 days earlier, Naomi Brooks had arrived at the Han estate at 7:10 on a Monday morning with a canvas lunch bag, a notebook, and one rule she had learned from years of working in wealthy homes. Notice everything, but never mistake noticing for permission. At 31, Naomi was patient, organized, and careful with details other people ignored. Mrs. Evelyn Hayes, the senior housekeeper, had hired her after 2 interviews and immediately appreciated that Naomi could inventory an entire linen closet without being asked twice. By noon, Naomi had learned the rhythm of the estate. Housekeeping moved through the east corridor. Deliveries entered through the service gate. Administrative staff worked from offices near the rear courtyard. Richard Cole controlled nearly all of it. At 48, the estate manager had worked for Vincent Han for years and carried himself like a man who believed proximity to power made some of it his. Mr. Han is overseas, Richard told Naomi during her orientation. Anything you need comes through me. Naomi nodded. Understood. For most of the morning, nothing seemed unusual. Then she was asked to verify household supplies before signing an inventory sheet. Naomi counted 48 sets of imported towels. The invoice listed 72. She checked again. 48. In the pantry, 12 cases of specialty coffee had been billed, but only 7 had arrived. Cleaning products showed the same pattern. Small differences, individually forgettable. Together, they formed something harder to dismiss. Naomi carried the paperwork to Richard's office. There may be an inventory error. Richard did not look up from his computer. There usually is. The quantities on 3 invoices do not match what is actually here. That made him look up. You counted them? I was told to verify the inventory. Richard leaned back. You were told to make sure the shelves were organized. The sheet says verify. Naomi placed it on his desk. Richard glanced at the numbers and gave a short smile. You clean rooms, Miss Brooks. You do not audit them. Naomi held his gaze. Then somebody should. The smile disappeared. Richard slid the paper back toward her. Sign the sheet. I cannot confirm numbers I know are wrong. It is housekeeping inventory. Then correcting it should be easy. For several seconds, the only sound came from the clock behind Richard's desk. Finally, he took the sheet. Mrs. Hayes did not mention you were difficult. Naomi's expression remained calm. Careful is not difficult. She returned to work, but something had changed. Richard appeared twice that afternoon in rooms where he had never needed to supervise her before. At 4:30, Naomi opened a supply cabinet and found another stack of invoices clipped beneath an authorization sheet. She was not searching for private records. The paperwork had been placed directly with the inventory she was assigned to check. At the bottom was Vincent Hahn's signature. Naomi studied the date. She remembered Mrs. Hayes mentioning that Vincent had been in Seoul that entire week. Perhaps the document had been signed electronically. Perhaps there was an ordinary explanation. Naomi hoped so. She copied nothing and took nothing. She simply wrote the invoice number in her notebook and returned everything exactly as she found it. Across the courtyard, Richard stood behind the glass wall of his office, watching her. Naomi did not notice him, but Richard had already noticed the notebook in her hand. And before her first day at the Hahn estate was over, the numbers were no longer the most dangerous thing she had discovered. It was the fact that someone was afraid she could count. On Tuesday morning, Naomi returned to the estate hoping the strange numbers from her first day would have an ordinary explanation. By 10 o'clock, she knew they did not. Mrs. Hayes assigned her to organize supplies in the West Pantry, where Naomi found another invoice attached to an authorization form bearing Vincent Hahn's signature. The date caught her attention immediately. Vincent had supposedly approved the purchase in person 6 days earlier, yet Mrs. Hayes had mentioned over breakfast that he had already been in Seoul for more than a week. Naomi read the document twice. She did not photograph it. She did not remove it. She simply carried the folder to Richard's office and placed it carefully on his desk. I need to ask you about this. Richard looked at the page, then at Naomi. What about it? The authorization date. What is wrong with it? Mr. Hahn was overseas. Richard leaned back slowly. And the form says he approved it here. Mr. Hahn has people who handle paperwork. Then why does it say in person? Richard's expression changed so slightly another person might have missed it. Naomi did not. You ask a lot of questions for someone who has been here 2 days. Naomi remained standing. I am asking about paperwork attached to inventory I was assigned to verify. Richard closed the folder. Your responsibility is housekeeping. Then remove financial documents from housekeeping inventory. The room went silent. Richard studied her as though recalculating something. Do you know how many people would be grateful for this job? Probably many. Good positions are difficult to find. Naomi understood the message beneath the words. Are you telling me not to report inaccurate records? I am telling you to stay inside your responsibilities. Accuracy is part of my responsibility when you ask for my signature. Richard stood and walked toward the window overlooking the rear courtyard. People like Mr. Hahn do not have time for every small discrepancy in a household this size. Naomi looked at the folder. Then I suppose he trusts the people who do. Richard turned back toward her. For the first time, there was no polite smile. Leave the paperwork with me. Naomi did. At lunch, she sat beside Mrs. Hayes in the staff kitchen and casually asked whether Vincent ever signed household authorizations while traveling. Mrs. Hayes hesitated. Sometimes electronically. Would the paperwork say that? Mrs. Hayes looked at Naomi more carefully. Why? Naomi considered telling her everything, but something in the older woman's expression stopped her. It was not confusion. It was fear. No reason, Naomi said. Mrs. Hayes lowered her voice. Naomi, this is a good job. Do your work, collect your paycheck, and go home. Naomi stared at her lunch. Is that advice? Yes. Or a warning? Mrs. Hayes did not answer. That silence told Naomi more than words could have. Near the end of her shift, Richard appeared in the laundry room, holding a clipboard. His pleasant manner had returned. "There is an inventory discrepancy in the old service wing," he said. "I need you to verify it before you leave." Naomi glanced at the clock. Mrs. Hayes did not mention another assignment. "I am the estate manager." Richard stepped aside and gestured toward the corridor. "It will take 5 minutes." Naomi closed her notebook and placed it inside her locker. Something about the request felt wrong, but refusing without evidence would give Richard exactly what he wanted, a reason to call her difficult. She followed him through the service corridor until the bright main hallway disappeared behind them. At the far end stood a door Naomi had never seen open. Richard reached for the handle. "The inventory is in here." Naomi stopped several feet away. "What inventory?" Richard looked back at her. His smile was calm again. "The kind you should have ignored yesterday." By Wednesday morning, the official story inside the Hahn estate was simple. Naomi Brooks had quit. Richard Cole delivered the news before breakfast with the casual irritation of a manager inconvenienced by an unreliable employee. "She left without notice," he told Mrs. Hayes in the staff kitchen. "Do not put her back on the schedule." Mrs. Hayes stared at the empty chair where Naomi had eaten lunch the day before. "Did she call?" "She spoke to me directly." "That does not sound like Naomi." Richard closed the scheduling binder. "You knew her for 2 days." He walked away before Mrs. Hayes could answer. For several hours, she tried to accept the explanation. Employees left unexpectedly all the time. Better offers appeared. Family emergencies happened. People changed their minds. But shortly before noon, Mrs. Hayes opened Naomi's locker while preparing to clear it for another employee. Her canvas lunch bag was still there. So was her notebook. Beneath them lay a small silver locket Naomi had worn both days. The one she had mentioned belonged to the grandmother who raised her. Mrs. Hayes held it in her palm and felt uneasiness settle into something colder. Naomi might abandon a job. She would not abandon that locket. "Richard," Mrs. Hayes said when she found him near the administrative offices. "Her belongings are still here." He barely looked up, then boxed them. "Her purse is here too." That made him pause. She probably forgot it. Mrs. Hayes stared at him. She left without her purse, her notebook, and her grandmother's locket? Richard's expression hardened. "Evelyn, you manage housekeeping. I manage the estate." The distinction was deliberate. Do not create a problem where there is none. Mrs. Hayes said nothing more. That evening, she carried Naomi's belongings into her own office instead of throwing them away. On Thursday, Naomi's name disappeared from the employee schedule. On Friday, Richard told payroll that her final check should be held pending paperwork. By Saturday, a new housekeeper had been interviewed. The estate continued functioning with the smooth efficiency Vincent expected from thousands of miles away. Meals were prepared. Floors were polished. Security summaries arrived electronically every night. Every report said the same thing in different language: normal operations. But the people inside the house knew something was not normal. A groundskeeper mentioned seeing a light in the old service corridor after midnight. Richard told him maintenance was testing electrical circuits. A kitchen assistant thought she heard movement behind a closed door while carrying supplies downstairs. Richard said old pipes made strange sounds. Mrs. Hayes walked toward the corridor twice. Both times she stopped before reaching the end. Richard had worked for Vincent for years. He approved schedules, recommendations, bonuses, and terminations. Everyone understood what challenging him could cost. By the 9th day, Mrs. Hayes hated herself for understanding that fear and still obeying it. She placed Naomi's silver locket inside her desk drawer every morning and took it out every evening. On the 11th night, she finally opened a message to Vincent on her phone. She typed 4 words: "Something is wrong here." Her thumb hovered over send. Then footsteps passed outside her office. She deleted the message. The next afternoon, Richard announced that Vincent's flight would arrive the following day. Everyone relaxed slightly. They believed time had almost run out for whatever secret the estate was holding. What nobody knew was that Vincent had changed his flight without telling Richard. Near midnight, headlights moved silently through the front gates. Vincent stepped from the car 13 hours earlier than expected, carrying his own travel bag. Richard was asleep. Mrs. Hayes was asleep. The main floor was dark. Then Vincent noticed one ceiling light burning in a corridor that should have been empty, and for the first time in 12 days, someone with enough authority to ignore Richard Cole began walking toward the old service wing. Vincent had spent his adult life believing that a well-run house revealed itself through silence. That night, silence revealed exactly how wrong he had been. Once Naomi had water and the medical team was on its way, Vincent instructed the security supervisor to restrict Richard Cole's access to the estate until the situation could be reviewed. He did not announce accusations. He did not summon Richard into the corridor. Naomi had asked for one thing first: safety. Vincent intended to give her that before demanding answers from anyone. "Miss Brooks," he said, remaining several feet away, "the medical team will be here shortly. Is there anyone you want contacted?" Naomi considered the question. "Mrs. Hayes." Vincent looked toward security. "Wake her and bring her here, but tell her nothing until Miss Brooks is comfortable seeing her." Naomi studied Vincent carefully. "You really did not know?" It was not a question. Vincent's jaw tightened. "No. That might be worse." The words landed harder than an accusation. Vincent could have defended himself. He could have reminded her that he had been overseas, that Richard had managed the estate for years, that reports had shown nothing unusual. Instead, he asked why. Naomi held the water glass between both hands. "Because this happened in your house, under people who use your name to make everyone else afraid." Vincent said nothing. The medical team arrived minutes later and helped Naomi move to a quiet guest suite on the first floor, where she could rest without returning to the service wing. Before anyone assisted her, Vincent asked whether she wanted him to remain. "No," she said. "Then I will be outside." He left immediately. When Mrs. Hayes arrived in a robe beneath her winter coat, she saw Naomi through the open guest room door and stopped as though the floor had vanished beneath her. One hand rose to her mouth. "Naomi." Naomi looked at her. Neither woman spoke for several seconds. Mrs. Hayes began crying quietly. "I knew something was wrong." Naomi's expression did not soften. Knowing and doing something are different. Mrs. Hayes lowered her eyes. "I am sorry." Vincent heard every word from the hallway. He also heard what Naomi did not say. She did not forgive her simply because she apologized. Around 2 in the morning, Naomi finally agreed to speak with Vincent again. Mrs. Hayes remained nearby at Naomi's request. Vincent took a chair across the room rather than standing over her. "Tell me only what you are ready to tell me," he said. Naomi looked toward Mrs. Hayes, then back at Vincent. "I found invoices that did not match the supplies. Then I found an authorization with your signature." "My signature?" "The document said you approved it here while you were in Seoul." Vincent's expression became still. "And you asked Richard about it?" Naomi nodded. "The next thing I understood was that he wanted me gone before I could ask anyone else." Vincent looked toward the hallway, where his estate continued to gleam with the same polished perfection it had possessed when he arrived. For 12 days, every report had told him everything was normal. Every number had been arranged to reassure him. Every silence had protected someone. "Why did you not contact me directly when you found the document?" he asked. Naomi gave him a tired, almost disbelieving look. "How?" Vincent waited. "People like me do not get direct access to people like you, Mr. Han." The room went completely quiet. Vincent thought about layers of assistants, managers, security procedures, private numbers, restricted hallways, and the hierarchy he had once considered efficient. Richard had not created all of those walls. Vincent had. And suddenly the question was no longer only how Richard had hidden Naomi for 12 days. It was how Vincent had built a house where a woman could recognize something was wrong and still have no path to the man whose name was written on every door. For the first time in years, Vincent Han looked at the systems surrounding him and saw something other than efficiency. He saw distance. By 3 in the morning, Naomi was resting while Vincent sat alone in his study with every household report Richard had sent during the previous 2 weeks spread across the desk. Each page was clean. Each number appeared reasonable. Each security summary used the same reassuring language. Nothing unusual. No concerns. Normal. Operations. Vincent read those words until they began to feel less like information and more like camouflage. At sunrise, he called his independent accountant and instructed her to review every household expense from the previous 18 months. Then he contacted the security company directly and requested original access records, not the summaries Richard had approved. He also ordered payroll, scheduling, and purchasing records preserved exactly as they were. Vincent wanted facts before conclusions. By 8:30, Mrs. Hay stood inside his study holding Naomi's silver locket. I found this in her locker on the third day, she said. Vincent looked at it, but did not reach for it. Why did you not tell me? Mrs. Hayes swallowed. I almost did. Almost. I wrote a message on the 11th night. Her eyes lowered. Then I deleted it. Vincent leaned back slowly. Because of Richard? Because of what Richard represented. Vincent said nothing. Mrs. Hayes continued. He controlled schedules, recommendations, bonuses, hiring. Everyone knew he had your trust. People believed challenging him meant challenging you. The words settled heavily between them. Did I ever tell anyone that? Vincent asked. No. Then why would they believe it? Mrs. Hayes looked at him with a sadness that contained more honesty than comfort. Because powerful men do not always have to say what people are afraid of. Vincent's eyes moved toward the closed study door. He had spent years building layers between himself and inconvenience. Assistants filtered calls. Managers solved problems. Employees followed channels. He had called it structure. Richard had learned how to hide inside it. Later that morning, the first records arrived. A security access report showed activity in the old service wing on the evening Naomi disappeared, followed by repeated entries under Richard's credentials. Purchasing records showed discrepancies matching the numbers Naomi had questioned. Several invoices carried approvals that Vincent immediately knew he had never given. Still, he refused to rush toward the answer he expected. Verify everything independently, he told his accountant. I want evidence, not assumptions. Around noon, Naomi asked to speak with him. She was seated near the guest room window when Vincent entered, wearing borrowed clothes Mrs. Hayes had brought for her. He remained near the doorway until Naomi gestured toward a chair. Mrs. Hayes told me you are checking the records, she said. Yes. Richard will say I misunderstood what I saw. Then the records will show whether you did. Naomi studied him. You believe me? Vincent paused. I believe you deserve to be heard without having to prove your humanity first. The financial claims still need evidence. Those are two different things. Something in Naomi's expression eased. That is a better answer than I expected. Vincent nodded. I have been getting several things wrong lately. Naomi looked through the window toward the estate grounds. Richard thought nobody would listen to a maid. He may have had reasons to think that. She turned back. Vincent did not hide from the implication. I gave him authority without giving the people beneath him a safe way around him. That was my failure. Naomi remained silent. Vincent continued. There will be a direct reporting channel from now on, independent of estate management. No employee should need permission from the person they are reporting. Naomi's eyes sharpened. Do not change it because of me. I am changing it because you showed me why it was wrong. Before she could answer, Vincent's phone vibrated. He looked at the message from his accountant. 3 words appeared beneath the preliminary findings. More discrepancies found. Vincent raised his eyes toward Naomi. The question was no longer whether she had noticed something real. The question was how many people had benefited from everyone believing she was too unimportant to notice anything at all. By late afternoon, the investigation had stopped looking like a handful of bookkeeping mistakes. Vincent's accountant found repeated purchases billed above actual delivery amounts, duplicate vendor charges, and authorization records carrying approvals Vincent had never given. The original security logs created an even clearer pattern. Richard's credentials appeared throughout the old service wing after Naomi vanished, while the summaries sent to Vincent omitted those entries entirely. Vincent read every page twice. He wanted no accusation built on anger when facts could speak more powerfully. Mrs. Hayes sat across from his desk, Naomi's silver locket resting between them. How many people suspected something? Vincent asked. Mrs. Hayes looked down. More than will admit it. Names. A groundskeeper saw lights in the corridor. A kitchen assistant heard movement. I found Naomi's belongings. Vincent's expression remained controlled. And nobody contacted security? Mrs. Hayes hesitated. Richard controlled what security heard from staff. Nobody contacted me. Her eyes lifted. We did not believe we could. Vincent leaned back. That answer still hurt more than Richard's forged paperwork. Why? Mrs. Hayes took a breath. Because everyone here was more afraid of disappointing powerful men than protecting a powerless woman. The study went silent. Vincent looked toward the windows, where the estate grounds stretched beneath a pale winter sky. He had always believed fear was useful when directed outward. He had never considered what happened when it seeped inward into payroll offices, kitchens, hallways, and employee conversations. I never asked anyone to fear me, he said. Mrs. Hayes nodded sadly. Sometimes people fear the distance more than the person. Vincent understood. That evening, he asked Naomi whether she wanted her locket returned. He did not enter her room until she invited him. When Mrs. Hayes placed it in Naomi's palm, Naomi closed her fingers around it and remained silent for several seconds. My grandmother gave me this when I graduated high school, she said. She told me that people would sometimes decide my value before hearing me speak. Vincent sat across from her. She was right. Too often, Naomi fastened the locket around her neck. Richard did not think I was dangerous because I knew the numbers were wrong. He thought I was dangerous because I refused to pretend I did not know. Vincent nodded. The audit supports what you found. Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly. Supports? I am choosing my words carefully. The review is still active. A faint expression of approval crossed her face. Good. Vincent almost smiled. Even now, Naomi did not want revenge dressed as justice. She wanted the truth strong enough to survive scrutiny. There is something else, he said. The security records show Richard accessed that corridor repeatedly. Naomi looked toward the window. Then you know enough to understand why I was afraid. Yes. Do you know enough to change what happens next? Vincent considered the question. Not by myself. Naomi turned back toward him. That is another better answer. The following morning, Vincent interviewed employees individually with an outside human resources advisor present. Once Richard's authority was no longer hanging over them, details emerged quickly. A delivery driver had questioned inflated receipts months earlier. A payroll clerk had noticed unusual adjustments. A groundskeeper had been told never to enter the service corridor without Richard's approval. Small silences, accumulated over time, had become a shield. By noon, Vincent's accountant delivered the preliminary evidence folder. Richard's administrative access had already been suspended. External authorities had been contacted through counsel. Vincent closed the folder and looked toward Naomi, who had chosen to join the meeting with an independent advocate beside her. You do not have to face him, Vincent said. Naomi touched the silver locket at her throat. I know. Then why come? Her eyes remained steady. Because for 12 days, he decided where I was allowed to be. She stood. He does not get to decide which room I walk into now. Richard entered the library expecting a private conversation. Instead, he found Vincent seated at the long walnut table with an outside attorney on one side and Naomi on the other, her independent advocate beside her. Mrs. Hayes stood near the windows. Richard stopped when he saw Naomi. For the first time since Vincent had known him, the estate manager seemed unable to choose an expression quickly enough. Mr. Hahn, Richard began. I can explain. Vincent gestured toward the empty chair. Sit down. Richard obeyed. His eyes returned to Naomi. I do not understand why she is here. Naomi said nothing. She did not need to. Vincent placed a folder on the table. Your purchasing authority has been suspended. Your administrative access has been revoked. The financial records and original security logs are being reviewed independently, and relevant evidence has been provided through counsel to the appropriate authorities. Richard's face tightened. Based on what? The accusations of a maid who worked here for 2 days. The room became still. Naomi held his gaze. Vincent did not raise his voice. She was never just anything. You only needed me to believe she was. Richard leaned forward. You are taking her word over mine after years of service? No. I am taking invoices, access records, payroll entries, vendor statements, and documented inconsistencies seriously. Naomi identified the first discrepancies. The evidence did the rest. Richard looked toward Mrs. Hayes. You know how this estate operates. Mrs. Hayes answered quietly. I know how afraid we became to question you. Richard turned back to Vincent. I protected this house. Vincent's expression remained unreadable. You protected your control over it. Richard began offering explanations. Vendors made mistakes. Dates were entered incorrectly. Security logs could be misunderstood. Vincent listened without interruption until Richard finished. Then he opened the folder. You will have the opportunity to provide those explanations through the proper process. I will not decide matters that belong with independent investigators. Richard stared at him. After everything I have done for you? Vincent glanced toward Naomi. That sentence is exactly the problem. You believed working near my authority placed you above accountability. Richard's attention shifted to Naomi again. And what does she want? Money? A position? Naomi finally spoke. Her voice was calm. I wanted to go home. Nothing in the room moved. For 12 days, she continued. I wanted the same ordinary thing everyone in this house expected at the end of a workday. To leave. Richard looked away first. Vincent closed the folder. This meeting is over. Richard stood, but Vincent remained seated. There was no dramatic threat, no public spectacle, only the quiet removal of privileges Richard had mistaken for permanent power. Security personnel waited outside to supervise his departure from the property in accordance with counsel's instructions. Before Richard reached the door, Naomi spoke again. Mr. Cole. He stopped. You told me I cleaned rooms and did not audit them. Richard slowly turned. Naomi touched the silver locket at her throat. You were right about one thing. I was hired to clean rooms. She paused. You were wrong to think that meant I could not see what was happening inside them. Richard had no answer. After he left, nobody celebrated. Naomi simply exhaled and sat back down. Mrs. Hayes wiped her eyes. Vincent looked around the library at people who had spent too long measuring their words according to who held the most authority. There will be changes here, he said. Naomi looked at him. Policies are easy to change. Vincent nodded. Culture is harder. Then start there. He accepted the correction without defensiveness. Later that afternoon, the old service corridor was reopened for inspection, and every access restriction was reviewed by an outside team. Vincent stood at the entrance, but did not go inside. Naomi had already spent enough time having other people decide what that space meant. When he turned away, he saw her walking through the main hallway beside her advocate, not behind anyone, not waiting for permission. For the first time since returning home, Vincent understood that changing everything did not mean becoming Naomi's rescuer. It meant dismantling the conditions that had allowed everyone else to believe she could be ignored. 3 weeks later, Naomi Brooks returned to the Hahn estate beneath a clear winter sky. She was not wearing the gray housekeeping uniform. She wore a navy coat, dark slacks, and the silver locket her grandmother had given her years earlier. The house looked almost exactly as she remembered it, but the rules inside it had changed. Employees now had a confidential reporting channel managed outside estate administration. Purchasing approvals required independent verification. Security concerns could bypass department managers entirely. Most visibly, the old policy directing household employees through a separate staff entrance had been removed. Vincent had learned that changing a building was easier than changing the assumptions people carried through it, but he had started with both. Naomi had returned to collect the last of her belongings and review documents with her advocate. She expected to stay less than an hour. Mrs. Hayes met her in the foyer and embraced her only after asking permission. I kept your notebook, she said. Thank you. Mrs. Hayes hesitated. I still think about the message I deleted. Naomi looked at her. Then remember it the next time somebody needs you to press send. Mrs. Hayes nodded, accepting the words without asking for forgiveness. Vincent waited in the library until Naomi chose to see him. When she entered, he stood but remained behind the table. How are you? He asked. Better. I am glad. A folder rested between them. Vincent touched it lightly. There is something I would like you to consider, but you owe me no answer today. Naomi sat across from him. What is it? A compliance position. She raised an eyebrow. Here. Connected to the estate operations office, but independent of household management. Reviewing purchasing, employee reporting procedures, and vendor records. Naomi almost smiled. You want to hire the maid who questioned your invoices to question more invoices? I want to hire the person who noticed what experienced administrators missed. Naomi opened the folder. The salary was higher than she expected. The authority was clearly defined. She read several pages before looking up. Who would I report to? An outside compliance firm. And if I find something involving you? Vincent did not hesitate. You report it. Naomi closed the folder. I want independent counsel to review this. Of course. I want the salary adjusted. Vincent's mouth moved slightly, almost a smile. By how much? Naomi told him. He nodded. Reasonable. And I want written protection against retaliation for every employee who uses the reporting system, not only management. Vincent considered that longer. Agreed. Naomi slid the folder back toward him. Then revise it, and I will consider signing. She had not accepted a favor. She had negotiated terms. Vincent understood the difference. When their conversation ended, they walked toward the foyer. Naomi noticed the service entrance down the adjacent corridor and stopped. For years, Employees had been expected to enter and leave through that door because hierarchy had been built into the architecture of the house. Now a small notice beside it stated that employees could use any designated public entrance during working hours. Naomi looked toward the enormous front doors. Vincent followed her gaze, but said nothing. He did not open the door for her. He did not tell her which way to leave. He simply stepped aside. Naomi walked forward and placed her hand on the brass handle. 3 weeks earlier, other people had decided where she could go, what questions she could ask, and whether her voice mattered. Today, nobody made the decision for her. She opened the front door herself. Cold sunlight crossed the marble floor as she stepped outside. Vincent remained behind, watching without expectation. Naomi descended the steps, then turned briefly toward the house. It was still Vincent Han's estate. His name was still on the gate. His influence had not disappeared, but something more important had changed inside those walls. Power was no longer being mistaken for permission to erase another person's dignity. Naomi smiled faintly and continued toward the waiting car. And that day, the house did not remember who had the most power. It remembered the woman who refused to surrender her dignity.